we're going to try to cover in a very short time period, so we are going to get started. And just so you know, to eliminate the background noise, the lines are muted, but as you can see, the chat window is open. Please put your questions in the chat window, and we will get to those at the end of the presentation. And also, we'll open up the lines. Your feedback and questions, participation are very important to us. So we are going to spend some time after the presentation to go over any of your questions that you might have. To kick off the presentation today, I'm going to turn it over to Dave Munson. He is the Vice President of Software at HCL. Dave?
Thank you. And good afternoon. We're pleased to have this opportunity to speak with everybody today on today's topic, which is really about managing application security to reduce enterprise risk. And this topic is really important. It kind of talks to the convergence point of how you protect personally identifiable information in your enterprise. 33% of security breaches are executed via the application layer. That's a little known statistic. And actually 90% of applications have known security flaws. And it takes a little bit over a month to typically patch those flaws. So this goes beyond being an IT problem. You know, as what we're talking about here is you have to make sure you're locking down your application layer so that you don't have a business risk problem and reputation problem at an enterprise level. And we're joined today by Rob Cuddy, who is on our team, and he is our global application security evangelist. Rob has a tremendous amount of expertise in this area, where security meets with actually development, activities. And what Rob's going to talk about today is really how you can take measures to make sure that your program, is evaluating ways and making sure you're executing ways to manage your security risk by virtue of your application security program. So let me hand it over to Rob now, who'll take you through the remainder of the presentation. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
Hey, great. Thank you so much, Dave. Appreciate that. Hi, guys. This is Rob Cuddy. I am a global application security evangelist for HCL, which basically means I spent time doing thought leadership and trying to make the connection for application security and a lot of other areas. And today we wanted to talk about the intersection of this and personal data. And where I wanted to start with first was really with just kind of a quick story why I believe application security is actually personal. What you're looking at here is a lease agreement that was shared with me not too long ago. And the point I want to make here is that people have the right intentions, but they don't always do the right things. Everywhere on this form where you see a black box, someone's personal information was being shared plainly. So things like a driver's license number, a social security number, an email, names, addresses, phone numbers, and things like this. And we got a hold of this because somebody was looking to rent a place and they wanted to see a copy of the lease, and this was the page in there. And so this was sent digitally and stored electronically and all of that. But the point is absolutely not what we want to be doing, right? Things like this become a real problem. So I actually talked to the landlord who had this lease, and what he told me was, hey, we need to be able to do background checks. We have to be able to verify people who are going to come in, and this is an easy way to do it. And I informed him that that was kind of a problem and people probably would not appreciate it. And he said, well, his lawyer didn't tell him that there was any issue with that. So I went and actually looked it up, and it turns out it is actually a real problem. It's against law in the state of Arizona to do this. And so this is one example of where people trying to do it convenient makes it a problem. And then when I went in and dug further, I actually found out that this was a law that was added to the books back in March of 2018. So it's actually illegal to now be able to and just open this kind of information electronically. So we know applications are growing in importance. Those of us who deal with financial customers, maybe within the state of New York, I want to highlight the NYDFS here for just a second, because this was the first regulation I saw that actually had written into its explicit sections for application security. And what I want to highlight here is that not only say you needed to have robust application security program, they actually broke it down further for their internal and external types of applications. So when we think about the things that we're writing and coding ourselves, those things we're doing inside, you think about your DevOps and your DevSecOps initiatives, right? This was written in such a way that you had to have the procedures and the guidelines, the standards, all bells and whistles for how you develop, and that needs to be done securely. And oh, by the way, you need to be able to prove it. You also need to do the same thing externally. So how you consume your third-party software, whether it's open source or another vendor, you have to be able to prove that you can evaluate and assess and test the security of those applications. That was NYDFS in 2017. Well, what's happened since then is many states have now enacted different privacy laws to say how we handle data and how we can use those. And what I'm showing here is just the first half of 2019. There were another 20 to 25 that introduced legislation in 2018, and there's a handful of states now that are either in process or enacting legislation this year around data privacy. But what I want to highlight are the ones here on this particular slide, Massachusetts, Washington, and you can add California to the list because into effect January 2020. Far right-hand column, it's a little bit hard to see, but there are the letters PROA. And what that stands for is private right of action. And what that essentially means is that you as an individual citizen now have the right to take action against an organization who you believe has mishandled your data. So if there's a breach and you were compromised, you don't have to wait for an agency to get involved. You don't have to wait for a class action lawsuit. You have the ability to go and take action individually. So we're going to start seeing a lot of those kinds of changes coming around. Now, with the California Privacy Act, I want to use that as an example simply because the regulations are actually getting stricter than ever before. In the past, when we're dealing with identity theft, most of the onus is put on the individual, right? They have to contact their agencies. They have to go and rework what happened, and they have to kind of fight and prove that they were breached and their data was mishandled and things like that. Well, what happened with CCPA is they actually wrote in to the document that you as an organization, if you have to comply with this organization and it's based on revenue totals and how much data you're actually using and how much of your business is connected to personal data, but if you have to comply with this, you as an organization have to maintain reasonable security procedures and practices. So that means the onus is now on you. You have to handle data properly. You have to handle data appropriately. You have to make sure that you can't be hacked, that you can't have that data misused, that it's very, very difficult for people to be able to do those things. And so the next logical question becomes, well, okay, what are the reasonable security procedures we have to care about? Well, the good news for the state of California was back in February of 2016, the Attorney General at the time, Kamala Harris, came out and worked with a group to identify 20 different specific controls that were related to cybersecurity that define what these reasonable security procedures are. And that if you fail to implement all of these, then you are now constituting that lack of reasonable security. And what caught my attention when I looked at this was there's two of them in particular that deal directly with the application security space. So CSC4 is all about having continuous vulnerability assessment and remediation. So that means that even when we put our application into production, we need to be continually scanning those and looking for new vulnerabilities and new ways those things can be exploited. And guys, just because an application may be declared safe today does not mean that it's going to stay safe tomorrow, right? New vulnerabilities, new exploits are released all the time. CSC 18 talks about application security itself, and really that gets into having a program, how you develop, how you bring applications to market, and being able to ensure that they are secure at each and every phase of that process. So that gets into where are you doing your source code analysis, where are you looking for dynamics, where are you leveraging monitoring and health checks and things like that to make sure that as your development moves from conception to completion, you are securing it along the way. All right, so now you might be thinking, what do I do? How do I get involved in this? What do I do? So the first thing I like to think about is, assess your own application security program. And I'm curious, for many of you, does this kind of describe it, right? What you're looking at here is an okapi, and I love this animal because it's got the head of a giraffe, it's got the body of a horse, it's got the legs and stripes of a zebra, and it happens to be on the endangered list, right? And it looks like somebody just kind of took a bunch of things and put them together, and we came up with an okapi. Well, think about what happens in application security and the folks that are doing it, right? They're doing static application security testing. They're doing dynamic testing. They're doing some interactive testing. They're trying to do penetration testing manually. They're trying to do mobile security testing. They're using web application firewalls. Some people are getting into RASP. And oh, by the way, they often also feel like they're on the endangered list. We all know, right, from the studies that we're seeing, that there's anywhere between 2.5 million and 3.5 million unfulfilled jobs expected to be going on by next year, right? So depending on the study you read, lots and lots of concern over what we call the skills gap. And we're starting to see people address that, but this is a big coming problem. So when you look at your tools, right, the question to ask here is, do they work together? We have all of these different things going on trying to give us information about our security and its posture, but do they work, right? Small organizations, in a study done by my friend Matt over at Palo Alto, right, 15 to 20 different tools just in the small organizations. But if you're a reasonably sized enterprise, you may have up to 130 tools on average, and this is just in the cybersecurity space. So this doesn't get into development and testing, QA and things that we're doing there. This is just around cyber. I talked to a CISO last quarter who was saying, we have about 30 different tools that we use, and we got that way because we were looking for one capability and we wanted best of breed in that capability, and so that's all we never bothered to look at whether the tools we had could do that capability that we were looking for. So this is kind of popping up. You've got lines of business acquiring tools, and so things happen. But we need to start asking the questions of, are these things working together? Because we want to be able to report up risk intelligently and actually have a sense of our security posture. So the second thing I want to comment on here is pay attention to what I call the little things that can make a really big difference. And to do that, I'm going to use an example from my favorite team. So this is, going back to last year, watching the first game of USC's season, seemingly normal play, quarterback gets sacked towards the end of the first half. Nobody thinks anything of it, but all of a sudden you can see the look on his face and things turned into a really big thing quickly. Next thing you know, he's being carted off to the sidelines, right? And so now everybody in the stands, everybody watching on television is kind of going, okay, what do we want next, right? What would you do? Well, we want to know the state of that athlete, right? So he goes and he gets an MRI. And so that's to discover the full extent of the injury and go to determine the best course of action, right? We know this intuitively. If we get hurt, we go to the doctor, we want to know what's going on. Sure enough, turns out the guy's out for the season with a torn ACL and meniscus, and that now has a huge impact on how the rest of that season is out. Now everything has to pivot, right? So we want to know when things are a problem. How do we do that, right? How do we pay attention and find those little things? Well, we advocate making vulnerability scanning as natural as getting a checkup. We want the visibility all throughout our pipeline. What you're looking at here is kind of an example of connecting our security testing to a value stream mapping tool so that we can see security testing in context of other things like deployments or build times or different tests that have run and where are things getting bogged down in the pipe. But we want to make security scanning part of the conversation, okay? So what are some of the little things you want to care about? First thing is design. right? So what I want to talk about here is an example from the MITRE attack database. And what we're looking at here is a simple weakness exposure around private information. There's a number of these in MITRE, but the thing I want to highlight here is take a look at the couple of boxes that I pointed out. Most of these are caused by being accessed either by the user putting in information or by an application pulling it. But the error itself, when you look at that mode of introduction, this is an omission error. It's caused by people failing to put the security tactics into the architecture. That's a design problem. We need to be thinking about security right from the outset. So security should be a part of our use cases, a part of our Hill statements. We should be talking about it in daily stand-up meetings and things like that. If it's not, you want to think about making adversarial use cases. So things that say stuff like, as a hacker, I can enter bad information into a URL browser and gain unauthorized access to a system, right? Things like that. Another thing to pay attention to is open source. So with open source, we know that the use is on the, but the number of breaches that are occurring because of open source components is also going up very quickly. So you can see the trend from 2016 to 18. We'll get 2019 numbers shortly when those become available, but we know it's on the rise, and organizations like Sonatype and White Source are going out and doing research on that all the time. So some things to think about around open source. Right, the number one problem that a lot of companies seem to have when it comes to dealing with open source issues is they don't know where it is. Right, they have some idea of where it's been installed and a few people that are using it, but the organizations that have had the big breaches over the years, when you read their reports, and particularly ones that are coming out from the government agencies, you understand that they didn't really know the depth and breadth of where their open source use was occurring. So having an accurate repository is huge. I recommend that when you get the open source, you scan it when it's received and not when it's consumed. And what I mean by that is don't just have it downloaded and sitting in a repository waiting until somebody integrates it into an application to determine if it's safe. Scan that component independently and validate it before you start using it and integrate it into your applications. And don't expect your third-party provider to do that for you. They may have different requirements or a different level of security that they need to comply to that's different from what you need to comply to, especially if you're in a regulated industry. And the last thing I'll say about this is you want to keep your principles firm and your practices flexible and not get those two confused. And what I mean by that is if you're operating with a policy of zero trust, if you're saying all of our software has to be validated before it's integrated into a pipeline, then make sure that if you have practices or workflows or policies that are allowing people to get around that, that you deal with those policies and keep those principles firm, that you want to maintain zero trust, you want to maintain integrity of your pipeline. Too often we see people kind of adjust the policies and practices instead, and then they kind of ease up on the principles and allow people to work around because that gets us there faster. The end result of that can be disastrous. Okay, next thing is just integrations, right? We talked a lot about how we have all these different tools and they're all doing different parts of our pipeline. What I'm showing here is just very simply different places where security, so everywhere you see that little flame symbol, right, can intersect with the pipeline easily and provide information to us to give us better visualization around how we're doing. We want to be able to do it at code staging, at testing stages, and be able to track and provide that feedback. And we want that feedback to be actionable so that developers can take it and move with it and then do something to give us a better benefit. Okay, and the last what to pay attention to is in the API, artificial intelligence, machine learning, what we kind of call the space, right? So with APIs, I'm not sure if this one's using them, but how well are you testing them? And if you're curious about what to test for, OWASP has recently released a new top 10 just for APIs to be able to say these are the things that making sure people can do in your applications, right? Being able to leverage these things. And so you can now test against those and be able to determine whether your APIs are safe for use. When it comes to your artificial intelligence and machine learning, right, we want to be making sure that the data we have is answering the right questions. So a lot of times we can get a lot of data, we can try to interpret it, but the conclusions we end up with aren't exactly helpful. We want to make sure that what you're using can give you an accurate assessment on your risk posture. Where are you most vulnerable? What do you need to address first? Is your security posture improving? In other words, are we safer than we were a year ago, or are we more at risk? And how are we doing across the portfolio, right? How many applications have we actually assessed, and where do we stand? So you want to make sure you're getting the right questions in there and the insight that you're looking for. So kind of really I love this visualization here, because this is kind of what I want for application security program. What you're looking at here is a bunch of white cells, white blood cells attacking an infection. And so you see a quick recognition and then an immediate response, and everything converging on dealing with that vulnerability and eradicating it. This is what I want from my developers. I want them, when they check in changes into a repository, to get a sanity check to be able to say whether or not their stuff is safe. And as we move through the pipeline, be able to eradicate that if we keep coming up with vulnerabilities. So HCL can help with that. So just real quick highlights on what we do. Everything I talked about, DAST, SAST, IAST, open source mobile, we do that. We do that at speed. We're a big believer that we don't want to trade speed for quality, so that as you're going through your pipelines, we want you to be able to maintain pace, but be able to have security as part of that. So we do that through a lot of different ways, making it easier for developers, making it easier for you to leverage functional testing, giving you kind of prioritization around what you should fix first and visibility into that. And oh, by the way, we've made it even better. Last week, we announced a brand new release that you can learn more about through the webinar and the blog and the press release that we've got. And that's now available. And we also just don't want you to take our word for it, right? So we have it available where you can go for 30 days, try this out for free. You can use the link that you'll get here in the deck afterwards. And one of the things I just want to quickly highlight about that is that in this space where everything online and we're having to deal with, being able to have a cloud solution is great. We also have a lot of different reports relative to the industry that you can take advantage of to be able to see how you're doing against different standards. We've got those for different security things like the OWASP Top 10, SANS Top 25, stuff like that, industry-related ones, and I've highlighted the regulatory ones here as well. So with that, we're going to go ahead and open it up for questions. So.
Hey, Rob, excellent job. I appreciate you putting so much information into a short time period. This is Bob Dugan with DAI Source. And while we wait on a couple questions, I just wanted to remind everyone, you can put your question in the chat area, and then we will unmute your line and begin a discussion. If anyone's not familiar with DAI Source, just so you know who we are real quick, the best analogy that I can use is if you're looking for a new car, you wouldn't go to different manufacturing plants to look at each car. You'd go to your local dealership that has experience being able to put you in the right car for your specific needs. And that's really what I do at DAI Sources. I help customers evaluate solutions, make sure they're getting the right solution for them, make sure they're trained on how to use all the features to maximize the solution, and then service it in the future, make sure that everything's running properly. So basically, that's what I do with DAI Source, and we work very closely with HCL, and I appreciate everyone's time jumping on. And just wanted to remind you that if there are questions at this point, feel free to put it in the chat box, and we will answer those questions. And look for an email regarding the trial and the other information that Rob had discussed with you, so that you can have all the information at your fingertips. So anyway, that's DAI Source and HCL. Thank you very much, and we'll wait for any questions that come across. Well, if there aren't any questions at this time, that is our presentation. We'd like to let everyone get on with their day, as well as, like I said, look for an email from me and from HCL regarding the follow-up and all the information that was exposed to you today. And feel free to reach out to me or Bill regarding any of your future IT needs, especially application security, and we'd be glad to assist you in any way that we can.